and welcome to another church planting broadcast. Tonight we have Joel and Amy Kendall with us, and Joel and Amy moved 18 months to live in a global city in the Middle East, and they have moved there to start a new community of hope and see many new disciples made. Their dream is to make many new communities like this in this great city and this great part of the world. Tonight, Joel and Amy will talk about calling and specifically call to mission in another nation. Just to remind you very quickly how our broadcast works, so we'll have shortly Joel and Amy come on, and then they will speak for about half an hour. In that time, please send as many questions about what they're talking about, and then I will put those questions to them after about half an hour. So if we can have Joel and Amy now, welcome to them, and I'm sure they will enjoy what they have to teach us. Thank you.
Hi there, everyone. My name's Joel. This is my wife, Amy. It's great to be with you. Thanks so much for giving us this opportunity to share with you today about the big topic of calling. We're just so excited that you guys do this, that this actually happens, that this is a community of kind of learning and just growing in this whole area of mission. And we just really want to encourage you guys in this session about what it looks like exploring our calling, particularly cross-culturally. So we're really not sure who's listening right now. We've got no idea, but that's exciting. Maybe God has spoken to you about moving to another nation. Maybe he's spoken to your partner. Maybe you're hoping that he's going to speak to you. But the reality is we're all part of this big call of God to bless the whole world. And every one of us, even if we don't have a specific place or a particular people group or a nation that we feel called to, we've all been called. We've been called up in this big story of God. So we just thought it'd be great to share our personal stories. We've been asked to share our kind of testimonies of our calling and how it's developed. And hopefully that encourages you, and we'll draw out some lessons along the way as we do that as well. Of course, it's not been an easy road for us. It's not been a smooth, just simple journey. Sorry if we make it sound like that a little bit, but that's just to kind of bring it into some sense of coherent story. But obviously it's unique ways that God calls us. And just like the story of Abraham, where God speaks to Abraham, our great father of faith, and says to Abraham, Abraham, I am taking you from here, and I want you to come with me on a journey to a place that you don't know yet. And I think it's just a great encouragement, isn't it? That if we are to be involved in all that God's calling us into, we're going to need the same courage to step out of our comfort zone, to step out from our family environment, often leaving cross-culturally. The same challenges that Abraham faced, we faced the very same challenges. And so just as we start, I guess there's this great big principle of God speaks and he gives us a calling to somewhere or to some people or something. God speaks, and then we get to step into it and discover it and pursue it and find out really what he said. So I hope what we share tonight is really helpful for you as you're doing that, as you're hearing from God and you're pursuing what he's spoken to you about as well.
Yeah, and we just wanted to start by sharing a little bit of our story just to bring it to life. So I'll start with myself. So I came to faith at university. So ironically, I met a believer on a pub crawl in my first year, and that was the start of me really exploring the claims of Jesus and coming to know him personally. And through university, I would say I deepened in my faith, but I knew that before I moved to London that next year to start my job, I needed to go deeper. There was some healing that needed to happen from my past, and there was just a sense of wanting to set good foundations for my life. So I decided to take a year out before joining the rat race, and headed to Australia to Perth to do a discipleship training school with YWAM, which was an amazing time, both at getting to know Jesus more and then having the opportunity to share him on an outreach time where we went to the predominantly Muslim world for a couple of months to Indonesia and then on to the Philippines. And it was actually on the return back from those trips that God spoke to me for the first time, where he started to unfold this kind of calling on my life. And in a time of prayer, I had this image, this vision that came to my mind of a lady in her mid to late 20s from a country in the Middle East, where she was wearing a full hijab and it just tore down the middle. And I felt like God said into my spirit that I've given everybody the right to enter into my presence. And I just knew that something had been dropped and deposited in my heart on that day, that it would never be the same again. And so I returned to London to start my career at Accenture, which is a global management consultancy. And for those who live in central London, it's quite a busy time. I was involved with my church, and I kind of put on the back burner this thing that God had said to me, but knew that it wouldn't always stay there. And it was times where I'd really meet with God in powerful ways in worship, particularly times focused on the nations. And I just knew that there was something there that I couldn't ignore. And so I started to explore that more. So I went on a life change team to Jordan, a country in the Middle East, and just knew that whilst I was there, that actually that isn't where I didn't feel peace about. This is where I was meant to be, and I knew that I had to keep exploring. And then the following year after that, I met a man, a good brother named Joel, in a church setting. He also had on his heart to explore more what God was saying to him about the Middle East. And so we actually became friends by sharing that, and then quickly actually deciding to come to the country in which we now live, with a team of other people interested in this. And so we'll go into that more in detail in a moment about our relationship and how we ended up to come here. But I think I knew that when I lived in London, even though things were going well, and I love my job, I love my church, I had amazing friends and family, there was just this sense of kind of unsettledness in my heart that I knew that I couldn't just settle for this status quo almost.
So a bit more about my kind of journey and how I felt God initially talking to me about moving to this part of the Middle East. Before going to university, I travelled to Australia and New Zealand, and for me, just where I was at with my faith, it was a real time of searching, a time of really wanting to find out what he was doing in the world, what it looked like to follow him, to really give my life to him. I was just hungry to see him at work, really, and see what he was really doing. And whilst I was doing that, I had a number of people just in different parts of my travels where they shared prophetic words with me, which for me was quite a shock. I didn't come from a charismatic background. I didn't realize God spoke to us in that way. And these words were about me sharing good news with people who were lost, God wanting me to share with people from many nations and those people who had never had a chance to hear about him before, which was both exciting and disconcerting, because I had no idea what that looked like. But there was it really resonated in my heart, and I knew that was from God, even though it was quite a surprise. So when I then moved to London after my travels to university, I had loads of different friends suddenly from all these different places from around the world. Whilst at university, I started to gather a group of believers then, to really together start reaching out to those different people around us at university. And I was part of a university where there were 6 different campuses, and really saw God at work in that time. And we started a little group on each of these campuses, and we just felt like in that moment God speaking to me about reaching out to the nations all around us there in London. I knew at that moment it was reaching students from all over the world who were in the heart of London, who had come from all these different places and suddenly were on our doorstep, suddenly we had a relationship with. And again, I guess my heart was growing and growing for that sense of God's heart for the people of other nations as well. And as I finished university, I hadn't planned on taking this step, but the staff team at Christchurch, London, where we were based, asked me to come and be part of the student work, to lead the student work with Juliet Ash and Adrian Holloway, who were there at the time, were hugely influential in my journey as well. And God just really blessed our work with students, and we grew to a large community of students working in 10 different campuses, 10 main universities all across London. And we started to dream and think about how could we envision not just our international students, but all of our students to really grasp a heart for what God was doing all around the world. And so as part of the kind of the New Frontiers Mobilise network, we thought, let's gather short-term teams who would go and visit works in different parts of the world and get a taste for a different culture, get to see what starting of new communities look like in new places. And so I got involved in that and led a team to Malmo, a small community there, and then to St. Petersburg, where a new community had been started. And I realized in the process that God didn't want me to go to Sweden or to Russia. Praise God. Sometimes it's in the things that don't feel like they fit and they're not right in terms of what God's saying to you that we get clarity. So I'd say that's a really important part of our calling, actually realizing where we're not called to somehow gives us clarity about where we are going. So then as we reported back at Mobilise that year, I remember I gave a notice for everyone for the next year's teams, really excited about the next year. And then a guy called Julian Adams, who's a very prophetic guy, grabs the microphone and shares this prophetic word he felt God had for me. And he said, I see you as a church starter, and God has made you as a man for many nations. And he's saying you're to prepare yourself. And so not really sure what that meant. I thought, right, I will prepare myself. I will continue to invest myself in everything that God wants me to do. And praise God, our friends from Oxford, Emmanuel Church, that year said, we want to take a team of our students to part of the Middle East, where we're actually now living. And we said, absolutely, we'd love to see a team going there. And I definitely want to join that team, I said. So along with a great group of their students, I brought an Egyptian student from Christchurch, and we went. And really, I was blown away by God's heart for these people and everything God wanted to do there. And so coming back from that trip, I was hugely impacted and started to ask some really big questions about, should I be moving? How do I investigate the next step now? What does that look like for me here in London? How do I need to change my life now that I've come back from that? And as a church, we were starting to go through a big change, and chatting with Dave Stroud, who leads Christchurch, then about really the heart of the church was starting to see missional communities starting. And so I thought, that's really where my heart is, and wanting to start investing in starting new communities among those people that God had really put on my heart, actually in London.
Yeah, and around that time, as I mentioned previously, Joel and I met, apparently we'd seen each other in church a couple of times.
Definitely seen each other.
But I can't remember that. And so we were sat just sharing in a circle, what is God saying to you? And I think that's a good question to be asked, like, what is God saying to you right now, and what are you going to do about it? And we did that for the year, and my response was, I really want to go back to a different country. I knew that God had given me this sense of burden and heart for the Middle East, but I didn't know the country in which I'd see that kind of worked out. And so I shared I'd love to go back to the Middle East, and then it was Joel's turn, and he said the same. I would love to go. He'd been to the country we live in the year before, and he wanted to go back. And so we started talking. We chatted with the people that did the life changing New Frontiers, and realised actually it'd be really great to build a team together and go and serve some churches and meet with local believers, just get a feel for the nation, the culture, and what it looks like, and to be a person of faith there, and really wanting to invite other people on with us who also felt like God was speaking to them, and it could be another step in their journey and towards understanding more of what that call looks like. And we didn't just want a nice group of Christians that wanted to do something good in a country. We really wanted to find people that actually felt like God was speaking to them, and we built a team, and there was a real sense of, I think the reason we wanted to do that is because whilst we knew God was calling us here, we also felt like actually there was a sense of a leadership call as well, in that we would lead people with us as we did that. And some of those people who we were in that first team with us are now part of the long-term team, kind of the church planning team and the people that we're doing life with here. So yeah, it's amazing to see how it's worked out.
And just thinking about that, it actually exploring short term and exploring what your gifts are within the context of your calling is really important. So we had different people on that team who were saying, actually my gift and my sense of passion is, in mercy ministry, or in serving refugees, or in business, and seeing business really release finance and or building relationship. And so we had different people on the team, and we had the sense of particularly wanting to cease a team gathering to start a new community. There was a sense of everyone exploring within their gifts within that kind of short-term team. And I think it's a really helpful way of us exploring, kind of pushing, okay, where are my gifts? Exploring for a short time, how can I use my gifts within that context? And it's always within the context of team, and actually working that out together was really helpful, going together and realizing we have the kind of different parts to play. Sometimes we can have this really rose-tinted conceptual way of thinking about moving cross-culturally, pioneering in another culture. It's a glorious thought. When we came back, Ames and I, when we'd come back from visiting this Middle Eastern nation, we realized even if we don't move for a very long time, in London there are so many people from other communities, from other cultures, who've got no understanding of who Jesus is. Perhaps God would have us move to start new communities where we are, because if we've got this great passion, if we're not doing something where we are right now, then do we just have this wonderful conceptual idea of what loving people cross-culturally looks like, or are we actually doing it where we are? It's a big challenge, and it kind of brought us down with a bit of a bump. When we returned from this team, we moved house to another part of London where there was no community within our church community at the time, and we thought we're going to invite others to also come and live in this area, because there's a majority Middle Eastern people group here, and we want to really live alongside, love and learn about the culture of these people. So we initially moved with 15 people to a part of East London, and for us this was hugely helpful in us exploring our culture in two particular ways. Firstly, it gave us an opportunity to think, what does it look like to make cross-cultural friends? What does it look like for us to not just have this idea of cross-cultural relationships, but actually have cross-cultural friends, and start to then invite people on a discipleship journey with these people who we love, God's given us a heart for, and we were just really blessed in seeing a number of our cross-cultural friends coming to faith, coming to know Jesus during our time before we left, which was phenomenal, and just really faith building, and we learned all sorts of lessons in that. But also it was just a great chance to learn what contextualizing would look like, to move to a new community where we're starting something from scratch. There isn't a community who serves this culture at the moment, so we're learning to contextualize to this new community which just again a hugely important part of our sense of calling. So if moving to another culture is not where you're at in your journey right now, I guess just want to put the challenge out there. Could you move cross-culturally in your town or in your city to a new area and begin sharing God's heart with those who don't know him yet where you are right now? Could you be doing that? Would that be the next step for you in your journey? Would that help you in your sense of calling to make cross-cultural friends, to learn how to contextualize God's love to the people who he's given you a heart for?
Yeah, and if that is for this wasn't part of what we were going to say, but for the majority Muslim world, can I encourage you, wherever you live, make friends with the Muslims around you. Now, every single one of our friends is a Muslim, and I think if you'd have told me a year and a half ago, Amy, all your friends are going to be Muslims in a year, I'd have said, no, they're like the people you kind of avoid, aren't they, even though we're meant to love them. And so wherever you live, look for where God is working and seek these people out. They are open way more than you probably expect. And anyway, moving on. So Joel alluded to this slightly at the beginning, that our journey hasn't always been simple, and it's probably sounded quite smooth up to now. And I guess what we probably should have said is, we use the word we quite a lot up to this point, but actually the we was still a Joel and an Amy up until this point in the story. So when Joel talks about coming back from this country where we are and moving to East London, the reality of what that looked like was, I realised I liked Joel more than a friend. And so as Joel decided to move to East London, I all of a sudden decided that that was the right thing to do the right thing to do as well. So Joel said, I'm moving east. I quite rightly packed up my bags and followed him east and moved in with some friends there across the street from him. Actually, we maintained just friendship for over a year, and we're leading the community groups in East London together, and actually did friendship really well. But I think I started getting to the point where, and Joel announced as well that he was leaving Christchurch in this kind of period. He'd agreed a kind of slow handover because he had a lot of responsibility and really felt like it was time to come and live in this part of the world. And about a month later, we had the conversation where we realised actually maybe we are more than friends. And so we had this really fun year, or 6 to 12 months of starting a new relationship, working out whether we should be together, whilst dealing with sometimes daily the question of is he going to go without you? Are you going to go together? Are you going to get married tomorrow so that you can go together? Even I was like, is he going to go without me? Am I going to, it was really interesting. I think during that whole time, it actually became really important that we just ignored that background noise. And I think why we had such a peaceful relationship, and even now why we have a peaceful marriage, is there's that sense of just cutting out what everyone else says and listening to the Spirit and saying, okay, I still have peace about entering a relationship with this man that's just told me he's moving to the Middle East in 6 months, knowing that God is faithful and will work it out. And so if there's any background noise and lots of questions, just as best you can, block it out and listen to the Spirit.
And during this kind of whirlwind time, this kind of cauldron of working out our relationship with all these, massive questions around us, I think for me personally, as someone who I had a kind of definitely a stronger sense of calling about moving, definitely more quickly. Amy wasn't in that place at the moment. And the big challenge for me was, and I think this is something on timing, in kind of working out if one is feeling more strongly a sense of calling than the other. The big challenge for me was I couldn't, with a clear conscience, lay down what I felt like God was saying to me, because God is, He is our main priority in life, what He says we want to follow. But if I was going to marry Amy, if God was also bringing Amy into my life, I felt like the process I had to go through was I have to give this sense of calling back to God. He's spoken to me. He's said, here's what I want to do with you and through you. And I felt like I had to give this back to God, knowing that he would need to bring everything about, because it was his calling after all. It wasn't mine to hold on to and try and work everything out in my own kind of way. I had to give it back to him and realize, actually, I'm not giving up on this. I'm not just laying it down. I'm saying, God, it's with you. You're to work this out now. And it was honestly one of the hardest things I've had to do in my life. And actually really giving it over to God and not picking up myself, I think, was one of the most difficult things I've done. But prioritizing aims and us working together. Actually, what is God saying to us both? Feeling like God's been bringing us on a journey here together. There's a sense of calling together, but needing to trust Him for where that worked out. So anyway, it's a long story, but as we were engaged and getting married, we continued to explore what God was saying to us. And so we came to the global city that we now live in for a weekend to answer the question, actually, could we do normal life here? And just kept asking, honestly, those who were on the journey with us, those in church, our church leadership, who knew us really well, speaking into us, saying, okay, we know your gifts, we know what you're about, and then really speaking into us was a huge part of our development and our calling. It wasn't something we could work out on our own. It wasn't something that we're kind of, right, we need to have secret conversations about our calling because no one else understands us. But actually it was something we did really openly, and we're really blessed because we were able to have those questions kind of answered and spoken to by others. But what we realized from our time where we visited on this weekend, that our hearts were starting to grow to see something like we'd seen in London, but in this city, right in the heart of this global city in the Middle East, to see something really flourishing happening there. And there was a sense of faith that started to grow. So at this point, we start asking God where exactly He wants us to invest our lives. And for the next year or so, we really gave ourselves to what God was doing in East London. And from our initial group of 15, we multiplied that group a number of times and helped to start another few groups. And there's a community of 80 or so people gathered together now with this sense of ambition. We would love to see, we're believing to see a Sunday gathering in East London as part of Christchurch's vision. But as we were kind of on this journey, as this was coming to this point, I think though we'd loved serving with great friends, living in East London, we were faced with this decision where we felt like actually we had more faith now for this thing that God was calling us to over here than what God was doing in London. And so we felt like we couldn't commit ourselves to lead this site as it started. And so instead, it definitely wasn't the easy road. And I think this is part of what we realized at the time was, giving up friends, closeness to family, highly paid jobs, and doing what we could have kept doing, what still looked like a good thing, but missed out on what God was actually saying to us. So we decided that we weren't staying in East London, and we did a slow handover, announced to the church, and at this point, of course, some people start stepping back from you, and although they don't mean it in a horrible way, I think you have to prepare at times when you start following God. There's a sense of loneliness as you start to pursue God in that. You start to realize there's a cost in terms of relationally, and we've realized actually we've sent some people stepping back, but what we've noticed is the importance of having really strong, deep relationships with those who are close friends and family who are part of the journey with us, because this isn't just our own calling. It's not just your own calling. It impacts family, and actually lots more people are involved in your calling than just us. We can think very individualistically sometimes about our calling. And so we came to the point where we decided to move. We kind of made some difficult goodbyes and that sense of loss, but then we started to really share vision and gather team to start a new community where our heart really was. And that meant basically not having everyone as part of our team, but it meant realizing who is God joining to us, because where God's calling, there's always a sense of team and a gathering. And so we really wanted to look for who's God actually given the same heart, and who's he joining to our hearts to start this thing. We didn't just want a big group of people randomly who all thought, well, let's give this a go. We wanted people who we knew actually God has been calling in the same way, and we're joined together, because our calling has to be a sense of corporate calling. Who are we joining to is a big part of our individual callings as well.
Yeah, I think at the core of what we felt like God was saying to us was this heart to see a discipleship movement both in the country in which we live, but not limited to that. And we really had raising Indigenous leaders at the start, so that our dream is that we will be made redundant, which isn't everybody's dream, I'm sure. And also at the start, really, that there was a sense of weight, not just to start many local churches, but also have a community that would bless the city in which we live, and that because we are here, it adds to the flourishing and contributes to the flourishing of that city. So we were looking at the renewal of business, arts, hospitality, trade, different areas, and and amazingly, God's brought together people with all those different things on their hearts. Actually, we have someone who's desperate to start a cafe, someone who's involved in trade, and part of our role actually as leaders is to help and bring out that call that God has put on their own life and to see them flourishing. And I think for me personally, in that I worked for Accenture in London, a consultancy firm, for 6 or so years, and actually giving that up was probably the hardest thing I had to do. But knowing at the same time that there's this calling to bring the world of work and the church and the sacred and the secular close together, and to be in there and to get my hands dirty and to contribute to seeing it flourish and to be a carrier of hope into that environment and to use my skills for good. And particularly with starting, I've actually recently started back, which is probably why I've got black eyes and I'm not making sense all the time, back at Accenture here in a global city in the Middle East. We're doing so well. And I've recently started back at Accenture, and I am focusing on what I do, which is digital strategy, but also at the same time corporate citizenship, which has been really exciting. So corporate citizenship is where basically we use all our profits, not all our profits, that would be a bad business model. We use a percentage of our profits to help those in need. So whether that be training to help bring people out of unemployment, whether that be to bridge the gap between university and employment, and we work together with charities to help address some of those core challenge and systemic challenges. And it's been exciting for me to have that opportunity for it to be taken away, knowing that at the right time, a year and a bit after having time to go deep into language, God has given it back. And I think it's been so exciting to know that as a team, whilst we're all joining together and seeing this new community, we're also supporting one another and seeing the other parts of our call flourish as part of that picture.
Great. So that's our journey and kind of where we're up to now. Obviously, it still continues. We're still exploring. We don't have all the answers in terms of our calling. It's still being very much worked out. But just to summarize some of the points, I guess, that we've touched on. Firstly, kind of don't wait to be in a different stage of life before pursuing God. Don't wait to be married. Don't wait to be in the right job. Don't wait to be in the right situation. We both met while actively pursuing God in our own single lives and in our own ways. And really, don't waste the time that you're in. Don't waste the season you're in. Where you're at right now is a key part to you pursuing that. Number 2, invite others on the journey. Good friends, even people who came with us on that first team that we came to this city, they're now part of that. They're great supporters. They're understanding of that. They've been able to share more of what life is really like here. It has to impact others. You have to bring others in on the journey. It's not just your calling. God does the calling, so we can give it back to him. We can trust him with it, whether it's work, okay, what will that look like? Whether it's giving up different aspects of your life, realizing if you give it to God, he is going to work that out for you. That there's lots of unknowns in this sense of calling. We have to do a lot of pursuing, finding out, okay, but trusting God's going to bring all these pieces together as we follow him. Number 4, serve hard where you're at, but always have an eye on where you want to go and live with faith for that. I think just so thankful that we invested ourselves in London and in our community there. We learnt so much. We were so blessed in that, and it really developed our sense of calling, our gifts and all sorts of stuff. So I think serve hard where you are. Don't miss the opportunities where you are. And lastly, I think just in terms of your relationships, realize your family are hugely impacted by this. It's important that you share and have them really part of your journey, be really sensitive to them in that. We've wanted to share with our families, and it's been a huge blessing. It can either be a big challenge or a huge blessing, depending on whether you do that well. So yeah, those are our points. Look forward to questions.
Hello again, guys. That's really great, fascinating story. Actually, a few questions you already answered, but if you wouldn't mind just getting a bit deep into that, that would be much appreciated. Would that be okay? Cool.
Absolutely.
So, you know, you were talking about actually calling that you got before you met, and then how that kind of worked out afterwards. But did it change after that? And kind of with this, you know, how did others respond when you told them what you're thinking? Did everyone understand? Was there some, you know, how did you work it out? And what did your family say? How did they react when you told them?
Wow, that's a lot of questions. The first one, so I would say personally, yes, mine did change. I wouldn't say it changed, I would say it focused in. So I would say I had a general call to the Muslim world, or the Muslim majority nations, and then as I felt like I was, this is bad to admit, but I was like, not till I get married, God, come on, you're not moving there single. Even though I would say if you're single and God is speaking to you, don't wait to get married, I was the bad person going, I'll wait till I'm married. And then I think as I started to get to know Joel, there was a sense of, actually, in marrying him, I'm saying yes, partly to his call and what he's carrying. And it also helped to give me, you know, a sense of, okay, it's not just a random region now. At least I've got somewhere where I feel like God's taking me. And I think just you have to have peace yourself. I think I had to have a sense of, okay, this is narrowing into a nation, but I have to have peace about this because it is tough at times. You can be incredibly lonely. Language is a massive pain in the butt a lot of the time. I'm saying that after being in this work environment now, it's a killer. And I think having to have peace about where you go is really important. So whilst my call focused, I think I had to seek that. I knew that this is what God was saying to me. That was the first point. The second,
I think, yeah, so on one of the other, just pick up, so as we kind of started to share this, particularly, let's say with our families, I think there was hugely different responses. So one of our families were like, great, we're super behind you, we're so excited that God's saying this. And the other one of our families was a bit probably more cautious, and a little bit worried that we were just moving to a place where everyone's terrorist. To be honest, that was an interesting conversation to work through. So really that meant we had to say, okay, how can we introduce you to this culture? how can we introduce you to actually these people we've come to love? And that meant taking them to some of our favourite restaurants. Of course, in the Middle East, it's always around food. It's always kind of that time of chatting and sharing family stories. And in that context, I guess us being able to share our, not just what we feel like God's saying in the future, but our sense of love and relationship and what we've learned. I think that really started to open up that conversation with family members who found it more difficult to understand. Why on earth would you want to go and live among people who want to blow you up, was kind of one of the initial questions. But praise God, I think God's done a wonderful thing as we've shared that. I think their hearts have been won over as well by God for the people that we're around as well.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that, really trusting your family and your friends into God's hands. And he's God and we're not, and I think we're never going to convince them that what we're doing is the right thing, because I think always the cost of not seeing us always feels a bit higher than their desire for us to be here, and that's just the reality. You live with that tension. But at the same time, there's been amazing moments where particularly my family have got in touch and have said, well, they're believers, praise God now, like actually God's really spoken to me at church today about why you're there and it's amazing. And I think just seeing that happen over time, that God is faithful. He will speak to the people that he needs to speak to, and that's been a huge encouragement to us.
That's really good. And then, Joel, did you feel the calling diminish or grow, seeing it was you were talking about that you got the first initial calling at quite young actually. So how did that develop? Did you sometimes feel, oh no, I lost my calling, and then other times you were really encouraged? How did that work out for you?
Yeah, good question. I think I realised it was a very generic sense of calling to start with, and I think a real sense of love for the Middle East, but also just people from every other nation. And so as I started to kind of initially work that out in London, that looked like hanging out with Mongolian people, Chinese people, Eastern European people. It was Iranian people. It was basically anyone I would meet from another nation was a chance for me to express God's love for the nations, and it was just an exciting thing. And it kind of grew, but I think I would say there were times where I didn't know where that was going or what that would look like. And so I think those were probably the biggest challenges. Actually, where is it, God? I was going to Sweden, I was going to Russia. I was open to God, and I was wanting to push doors and really serve God in that way. But I think probably the most frustrating point in my journey, there was a sense of this calling growing and a sense of passion growing. But it was really that sense of, okay, where is it specifically? And then when I first came on a short-term team to come here, I think I was just really blown away, and I think from then really realised more specifically where God had called me to. And that was, I think, a really key moment for me, and then working out what are the next steps and what did it look like. But I would say it's always grown, but I guess it's kind of got more and more defined and more kind of narrowed in.
Brilliant. You said that it's really realizing where God is not calling you that makes us then kind of work out, when He's calling you. What would you advise to someone who actually, just some simple steps if you can, for someone who actually does have a heart for a country or culture? Is it the best thing to just focus on that country or culture, or just maybe go a bit wider and explore the things?
Good question.
Let
me start. I think I would say if you have people on your heart and they are close to you, as in that could be part of your life right now, I would say definitely do all you can to build those relationships and start investing in that way. But if if you don't have that opportunity right now, I would take. I would say what's been really helpful for me has been serving and loving people from another culture, even though it might not be the particular people group that you have on your heart, but knowing there's so much that of God's heart that you can share and learn about through serving someone from another culture and loving, starting to make cross-cultural friends. That will be really useful when you do have the opportunity to really serve those that you have particularly on your heart. So I'd say those two things. If you have opportunity now, definitely invest yourself 100%. But if not, look for those opportunities where you can continue to use that sense of heart and calling.
Yeah, just to build on that, I think our story was it went wide and it narrowed in. So we weren't sure and then just wanted to explore different places. We didn't know and had to knock other options out almost before we knew. I would say if you know, and particularly if it's for probably a Middle Eastern or it's a Muslim majority people group, and there's only 24 hours in a day and 7 days in a week, I would say invest there, because they view relationships very differently than we do. So you have to go deep and you have to spend a lot of time with them before you have opportunities to really have faith conversations. So just being realistic with capacity, if you have a sense of where God is speaking and you have peace that is what you feel like God's saying to you, I would put all your energy into that.
Yeah, well, discerning calling isn't an easy, isn't an easy thing. But what if you feel convinced actually that you got a specific calling, but whenever you step out into that calling, just it's just a struggle. How should you weigh that calling and if and the possible struggles of acting actually your calling? When is it time to stop and reset?
When Jesus returns.
Amen.
Good question. So you feel like you're pursuing that sense of what God's saying, but it's frustrating. You don't feel like you're going anywhere. Where do you get to the point of kind of saying, right, let's start again. Right, God, what are you saying? Go on, Donnie.
I would say the reality is you're probably going to have some very difficult times. So in the last year and a half, we've had some very difficult times, far more difficult than I ever had in England. And I think the reality of culture, language, homesickness is just hard. And I think you need to have a sense of faith. And I think you have to have faith in the daily things. But I think you have to ask and pray for that gift of faith that God gives you to endure. And so if you feel like you've got a calling, ask for the gift of faith to endure even in the tough times. Because I think you have to have, we believe we're called people, don't we? So if God's given you a call, you have to feel called out of that. So we will be where we are now until we get called out of this situation, not just when we get tired and want to give up. So I think pray for the gift of faith to endure, and don't move on until you're called to something else.
That's a really good answer. Yeah. And sorry, Joel, were you going to say something?
I was just going to agree with that. And I think, yeah, just the only thing I would add would be, if God's spoken to you, I think there's often a long journey before you really see what that looks like. So you look at Abraham and you think, there was a long, most of his life until he really saw, wow, actually God is going to answer the promise that he gave me right at the start of this journey. And so I think just holding on to what God said and realize there's not a kind of reset point. Okay, did God say something? And actually that's not going to happen. I think there's a sense of patience, working through things and realizing it might be a really long journey, that sense of calling. For us, I guess it's been a bit shorter. You know, it feels like, well, they've just, you know, explained this story over a few, you know, 5 years or whatever, and that seems really easy. Good for you guys. But I think for a lot of people, actually, it's a long journey, and I think we should expect that sense of we have to hold on. We have to say, God, you've said, you've promised, and kind of bring it back to God. But holding on to it, I don't think we need to say, right, let's start from scratch. Maybe I need something new from God. But I think we can say, God, can you bring this about? Can you bring clarity on this? You know, I'm holding on here, but will you bring something fresh?
Brilliant. And you talked about actually you individually getting calling, and how important is that, you know, that knowledge actually that you have been called individually and as a couple when you know, when the going is hard?
Yeah, great question. I would just say it's fundamental. It's absolutely fundamental. I think, you know, you come to points where it's just, you come back to that, God, you've said, you've spoken to us about being here. You know, you've put this on our hearts. You've made this happen. And there's been moments even where we've just kind of gone back on that and said, look, God, we don't know what the future looks like. We don't know all the kind of answers from here, but you've brought us this far. I think if we didn't have that, it would be very difficult in tough moments to say, what on earth are we doing here? You know, we've made life very difficult for ourselves if we're just making a kind of a decision based on something that I didn't feel like actually God had spoken to me about in the first place. So I think for Ames, it's really important. It's not just me. I think if it had just been my sense of call, I think it would be tough also for me, feeling like, Ames doesn't carry this same sense of passion and as I do, and that's tough. But also Ames would be like, just not sure I can do it anymore. So yeah, I think it's really fundamental. But that might look different as well, and that might be a different kind of sense of what that looks like.
I was going to say that I think Joel's always had a more sure and specific, yes, we should be where we are here. I think I love here, and I can't imagine, like, I'm glad I don't live anywhere else now, but I think actually my conviction is that Jesus should be made famous where he isn't known. And actually that's what I feel like my call is, that original, like, everybody has been given the right to come into my presence. And so if there is places in the world where there's not even that option being given, that's actually what I feel like God said to me, not you should go live in this country. And so in the hard times, I get really annoyed sometimes with the culture, the language. I actually just have to come before God, usually in a really simple way, put on a bit of Hillsong and just sit there and go, God, come on, please remind me. And then if you love Jesus, you soon get back to that place of actually, you know, everybody needs to hear about him. Everybody needs to hear about this person that loves them. And that, I think that's simple, just coming before God in that place of weakness and being like, you know, is this where I'm meant to be? I've never seen like writing in the sky. I've never seen anything. I've never had Julian Adams come up to me. I just always knew that there should be churches planted where there aren't churches. And I'm not going to go anywhere where there's lots of churches when I feel that's what God said to me. So mine's a bit more simple, but I think it's a deep call, because it's still something that the Spirit convicts your spirit of actually your purpose in life. And I think that's, you know, calling and purpose, if that is my purpose. And I think going back even to that core gives you the kind of energy in the tough times.
And would you just quickly give us some advice for couples who actually don't seemingly have the same calling? Or what would you say to them very quickly?
Dan, why don't you start?
Oh, flip. I would say a bit like I'd said at the beginning, try to not listen too much to what everyone else is saying, particularly family. I know that sounds really bad advice, but if you are married, that is, other than your relationship with Jesus, that is your primary relationship. That's where all of your security, all of your, like God intended most of your relationship needs to be met there. And trusting that if God called you to marry this person, which you need to feel called to get married to a person anyway, I think, that he will work the rest out. And I think if God has called you and has given you a love for someone and to marry, he is not a divisive God. So seek him, seek his will for your marriage, for your husband. As I actually, in the tough times where I used to get so annoyed at all the constant questions that I used to get, I used to actually say, God, I used to try and turn it and be like, keep speaking to Joel, like make it clear for him. And actually my heart stayed pure as I seek the best for him. And so maybe do that instead of being scared about what you're holding on to tightly, hoping that your own calling gets worked out. Maybe pray for your husband that his calling, his conviction becomes harder, and he'll probably be doing the same for you. And in that sense of relationship, in that sense of wanting the best for the other person, I honestly think God will bring those two together.
I think the only other thing I'd add, just like on a practical note as well, would be just creating the safe space to have those conversations and not allowing it to be here's something that God's spoken to me and I hold this over here, and here's something God's spoken to you and you hold it over there. But really being able to create the safety to say, okay, God has called us, will call us together into this, and let's have a real openness about talking about this. It can be one of the most tough things to talk about, calling, and it's something we feel most deeply but often can't really even communicate and express as well as we'd like to, or someone doesn't understand it as much. So I think particularly for the one who perhaps feels more passionately, not getting upset when the other person doesn't feel as passionately as you or doesn't feel as strongly about something as you, but being open and sharing that, and really being able to protect that. It's a really sacred space of saying, actually, God will do something really creative in your marriage to bring you to a place of oneness in calling and heart. But then I'd say as well, on a real practical note, just keep exploring together. Keep thinking, okay, where could we go together? What's the next thing maybe we could do to explore this? Could we go here? Could we go to this day where this is being talked about? Could we go out on a day out to pray together about this? Making sure there's always a next thing rather than it will just sort itself out. So yeah, giving that safe space, but just keep exploring, keep thinking, right, what's the next thing we can do here that might put us in a place where we could get clarity, have that sense of, God's leading us in the way forward here. Some thoughts?
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, no, it's excellent. Yeah, and how did different people, like obviously you were part of church in London, but how did different people play part in shaping your calling, and how did God use those around you? Just to cram one more thing in there, and did you get any bad advice? And how did you think? Oh, well, how did you decide that it was a bad advice?
Great question. Yeah, I'm trying to think of the bad advice now, one, because that's the more juicy question, isn't it? Everyone wants to hear that. I think we had one moment which was quite fun where
I know what you're going to say.
Where someone came up to Ames whilst we're working this out together, talking about that sacred space of protecting that kind of being open. Someone came up to Amy and said,
we were dating but not engaged. Important information.
You're not going to stop Joel moving to this country, are you? And because he's got he's got a really strong kind of cross-cultural gift and a real and I felt myself, we're both there, and I was like, I'm melting now. I'm like, what on earth are you? So I think not so much advice, but how not to help people who are trying to work that kind of conversation out. That was a fun one. Ames did not respond well to that.
I smiled. What was the other part? Sorry, it was bad advice and
how do different people play played part actually in you kind of discerning and shaping your calling?
Oh, I would say huge. I think, like we mentioned a bit during the time, like our family, we genuinely feel stronger because our family are amazing. We get messages all the time, we get little letters. I think keeping our family saying, actually, you are part of our journey. Like, we're not just going off and doing our thing, you are part of it. And I think that played a huge role. I think for me personally, some of my absolute best friends, Maeve and Pete Torrance, have played a huge role in my call. When we were dating, and we used to have to go to these horrible events about the Middle East, where Joel would speak about how much he loved it, and I was dating him, and he was going, and I remember calling them and saying, "This is happening," and they were like, "Don't worry, we'll come." And they came to London just to be by my side and just to kind of be on my team. And I think just that sense of having someone where I felt safe and loved at the same time as being very vulnerable, actually there was great wisdom in that. And I think I'd advise that, particularly for the women who have maybe got a similar situation or are unsure. Don't make yourself vulnerable or more uncomfortable than you need to be, because God isn't going to do that. God is going to gently lead you through this with kindness, because that is our God. He leads us gently. And so, I think it's a word, a lamp is to our feet. It's not like a bulldozer behind us. And I think that would be something I'd really advise, like the role of having people you trust and love to confide in, was hugely important.
What was the best advice that you got?
Retrospectively, it was to take time off for language, even though I hated that when I heard it. So I think for those who are moving to a world which is not in English, I would advise seriously setting time aside for language. I've recently gone back to work, and it is so tiring in a different language, and I praise God that I was humble enough to, I guess, that he showed me that I couldn't just carry on working and learn language part-time on the side, and just the importance of, and you enter a culture through its language, and just investing in time. And even now we're still studying full-time, working, I think that was amazing advice for me.
I think for me it was probably something Dave Stroud said about how you finish a season, that as you invest yourself and hand over and finish a season well, as well as you finish something, will set you up in a strong place for the next season. And there's almost like, a blessing from God in you finishing something well. And that was totally true. I just really felt like we kind of, where we'd handed over and really wanted to do everything we could to hand things over as best as we could, it felt like really we were in a stronger place when we started the next season than we were before. So I think that would be a bit of advice that I would share. Going into, if you're stepping into something new, finish really well and invest yourself in finishing well. It will really, you'll carry God's favor, and you will kind of step up in stature in that way into your next season.
Yeah, brilliant. What was the trigger for you to decide now was the time to leave what you were doing in London and move to the Middle East?
Yeah, I remember the time we talked about it. Remember?
I remember. So our favourite, it was a Saturday, and we went to our favourite place in East London, the Crepe Brewery. If any of you like nice IPAs, I would get over to the Crepe Brewery in Hackney. And we were just chatting about, do we feel like it's now? Do we have a sense of peace? And we just couldn't come up with a reason for it not being more of a, this has to happen now. We had grace for it. We had faith for it. We knew that Easter was coming into being a Sunday, and it was a good time to leave. And it was actually amazing, because we prayed that day, like, God, please, will you just show Dave Stroud, our leader. And then we went to see him the next day, and as he came in to meet us, he was like, we were trying to tell him, like, we think it's sooner than we thought, we're thinking next year, summertime, and he was like, we expected like a wait, you know, guys, come on, due east, in the nicest possible way, and we loved him. We were happy to stay with him, and he was like, oh, on the way here, I really feel like God spoke to me, and yeah, I think you should go as soon as you can. We were like, oh.
So how about in like 3 or 4 months' time? Do you think you could, you know, can you fast track what you're doing? Can you move earlier? And we were like, we looked at each other, we were like,
No.
Wow. It was just like the most amazing confirmation that the day before we'd had this conversation saying, right, God, what are you saying? Is it a, you know, we both felt like yes, and then God spoke to Dave as well. The last chat we'd had with him, he was saying, you know, could you give me 2 or 3 years? Yeah, let's really see this thing flying east. And then to hear him kind of turn around completely, that God had spoken to him that morning, we were just like, wow, this is really happening, and he's trying to get us out the door quicker than we thought.
I think in that though, don't be scared to like pray for signs or like just things that just keep you just encouraged in your heart that you're in the right way. And we did it the first night we arrived in where we live, and we said, God, just show us we're in the right place. And we went out for a drink that evening, and we started speaking with the person on the table beside us in English, obviously. She came back and left the bar, came back 10 minutes later and said, I've just not met an English person like you. Do you want to meet up again? And she to this day is like my best friend. We see each other nearly every week. She's really in exploring Jesus, and I just laugh at the fact that we just said, can we just meet one person to show us we're in the right place? And those little confirmations.
Yeah, that's really brilliant. And one crucial thing for every church planter is finance. Could you very practically tell us how did you manage to finance your call? And that's the last question. You'll be happy to know.
Yes, so we basically asked people. So for us personally, or as a team, shall I answer?
For you personally.
For us personally, because we're going to be leading the planting team, we wanted to raise finance for, we said we'd come and learn language full time for 2 years to really get great language, to be able to start something public to start something indigenous in that language, and then start a new congregation and believe for a new community to be started in that next 3 years. So learning from our good friends who'd already moved to this part of the world, and we just thought, wow, the way they prepared was fantastic. So we basically said we'd love to raise finance for those 5 years to cover us so that we can really lead and serve the team. We've asked the team have raised finance for the first 2 years to learn language. So we asked a few particular churches that we were well connected with, would they think about supporting us as a church to really get behind this new community that we want to see started. And alongside that, then obviously a few people kind of came in and said, hey, we'd love to support you, we'd love to support you. And gradually, a lot of our support has come in. Yeah, so I think that's just been a real journey of faith as well, and God has been amazing in providing. And I think relationships then were built that we didn't have before, and suddenly, you know, God brought provision from all sorts of different ways. But it was really from that sense of, right, who are we really connected with here, who know us, who kind of have a sense of confidence in us and want to journey with us on this new venture, and saying, hey, would you partner with us for these 5 years?
That does look different though for the team, because we asked them actually to not raise past 2 years and to look to go into work, so they can really get kind of stuck into the city. So it's a shorter period of time for them, just as a point. If you want wanting to lead a team, it doesn't always look like 5 years.
Excellent. Guys, it's been such a pleasure and privilege actually to speak to you and to hear your story. Thank you so much, and I'm sure that loads of people want to, you know, go to YouTube when we put it on and just listen again. So it's been really, really great to chat with you. All the best.
Thanks so
Love
much.
to your team. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much.